Hi, I'm John Mutchler, the pastor of the Ferndale Alliance Church. Please feel free to share these messages. And today we're going to talk about a subject that's more complicated than nuclear physics, quantum mechanics, brain surgery, biochemistry, and calculus all put together. We're going to talk about our human motivation, or what the Bible calls our heart. We've been studying Matthew 5:8, which says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, because they will see God." And we ended our talk yesterday with Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9, that says this, that the heart, the motivational core of men and women, is desperately wicked, it's deceitful, it's misleading. Above all things, who can possibly know it? It's difficult to understand, like physics, but it is knowable. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today by identifying 3 toxic sources of ignorance when it comes to understanding our own human heart, understanding why we are motivated to do the things that we do, why we make the choices that we make. I'm going to give you 3 words: selfishness, brokenness, and prejudice. First of all, selfishness. We are born with a sinful nature. We are born with a natural bent towards self-gratification and selfishness. Since infancy, we've been wanting and desiring, crying, demanding, needing, pleading, pouting. Our own natural bent is toward providing, protecting, pleasuring, and promoting oneself above others. Now, we have a vast quantity of appetites and needs. I know Abraham Maslow kind of boiled them down into 5 different categories. But we need to understand that those needs, and some are very legitimate, propel us towards selfishness. And so we might do things that might on the outside look like good and wonderful things, but they can be still, and they likely are, motivated by self-interest. We might say that we love someone, but perhaps more so it's lust. We might be a great volunteer. We might serve our communities and look like a great giver, but perhaps we are doing those things as a means to a selfish end. We might be very religious, very devoted, very pious, but maybe we're doing it to earn something from God or to impress other people. What I'm saying is that it's healthy to recognize our own self-interest and how it propels us forward, and to be able to keep it in check. Again, we're naturally inclined towards selfishness, and that's the default mechanism in us. We need to make an effort to make sure that what we are doing is done for the service of others, for the interest of others, for a more benevolent and more altruistic reasons. The second source of toxic ignorance is brokenness. Brokenness, we all have a measure of brokenness. This is the injury and hurt, the negative impressions and damage done in our lives over a long period of time. Things like abuse, neglect, betrayal, crime done towards us, prejudice and bigotry against us, disappointment, failure, crime, addictions of all kind, infidelity. Brokenness. To know our hearts and our motivational core, we need to come to terms with the things that have impacted our lives over a lifetime. This is not saying that everybody needs counseling, and counseling is good and healthy in its correct place. But this simply means doing inventory of our lives and recognizing that what events have done to us in terms of affecting our choices and our relationships. So we've talked about selfishness, we've talked about brokenness. The last one is prejudice. We have natural and acquired bents, leanings, tilt, curve, predispositions, biases, prejudices, partialities, one-sidedness, our own personal convictions and core values, and our own lack of objectivity, rather subjectivity. We have a way of looking at things. We have a natural tilt. We tend to believe what we want to believe that confirms our worldview about things. I'll give you another word: tribalism. Tribalism is the fact that we will submit our own thinking, our own reasoning to groupthink. We want to be conformed to a group, so we adopt the entirety of values of a group without being critical in our thinking. Let me give you a couple examples that are easy. Politics. We've had a couple controversial presidents. President Obama and President Trump, both equally controversial depending on what your politics are. I remember the things said against the last president, President Obama, horrible. They made me cringe. Some were blatantly racist. And this whole birther thing. People wanted to believe that he was born in another country, in Kenya, despite the evidence. And the irony of it all is, even if he had been born in Africa, he still would be qualified to be president because his mother was a U.S. citizen born here in the United States. And I'll give you an example that you probably didn't know about, or a lot of people didn't. We had a candidate, a well-known person run for president 4 years ago, the senator from Texas, Senator Cruz. Did you know that Senator Cruz was born not in the United States, but in Alberta, Canada, in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada? Last I looked, that's not part of the United States. Fully qualified to be president. I don't think anybody said a thing. This current president, President Trump, yes, a deeply flawed man, and I'm going to be the first to say, makes me cringe almost on a daily basis. But he is not a Nazi. He is not Hitler. And that kind of language and rhetoric, I think, says more about the people saying it than about the president. So we tend to believe what we want to believe. We watch the news stations, the news channels that confirm what we believe. When it would be healthy for all of us is try to get all sides of an issue. Let me share a personal example, and then I'll end this morning. We tend to dislike people or like people based on a limited number of experiences and encounters, and that sort of confirms in us. We call it first impressions. There was a guy in high school. His name was Scott. I hated Scott. If you asked me, who do you hate most in high school? It was Scott. We were always butting heads in the realms that we found ourselves in, usually musical groups. And I think we were both trying hard to be the alpha males in the groups, but we fought all the time. And I graduated, he graduated, some years went by, probably 12, 15 years, and I ran into a woman who was his sister-in-law. And when I learned of the relationship, I asked her, well, how is Scott doing? And my first thought was, maybe he's in jail, maybe he's doing terribly. And she goes, well, he just lost his job. He just lost his job. And my first thought was, I'm not surprised about that. It's kind of what I knew about Scott. And he probably got fired. And she went on to explain, she goes, John, you see, Scott became a Christian. And integrity was important to him. And he was being asked to do things at work that he felt were wrong and unethical. And so he left his job. And I was so humbled to hear that. I mean, it was a positive experience to me to realize that either I didn't know this person as well as I thought he did, or that he had changed over time. And so we need to recognize our own prejudices and how it affects our relationships. So once again, you want to know your heart? It's easier to understand physics than know your heart, unless you recognize these three toxic sources of ignorance: our own selfishness, our own brokenness, and our own prejudice. Thank you for watching. Feel free to share this message. Have a great day today. May God bless and keep you, and may God grant you a pure heart.